We are live. This is very exciting. Good evening, fellow aerospace enthusiasts. Let me check that the sound is working. And we have some confirmation of this. It looks like we're going well here. Oh, I'm going to turn off the sound of the one that's now talking at me, which is really disturbing and quite out of another world. Good evening. Welcome to this special live Q&A with Peter Beck, the CEO of Rocket Lab. My name's Annie Hanma, and this evening I will be asking all of your questions to Peter, assisted by Megan and Riley, who are crewing our mission control. If you've got a question, type it in the chat and we will do our very best to get to it. This is the second live event put on as part of Aerospace Futures Online by the Australian Youth Aerospace Association. To learn more about the AYAA and Aerospace Futures, head to ayyaa.com.au. And while you're at it, subscribe to this YouTube channel to get access to all future online content. Now, Peter hardly needs an introduction, but just in case any aliens have wandered in this afternoon, Rocket Lab is a private aerospace manufacturer and small-sat launch service provider with headquarters in the US and operations in the US and New Zealand. Peter, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. Let's kick off by asking you to tell us about yourself. How did you get interested in space?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated with space for as long as I can remember. You know, I would go outside as a child and look up at the night sky. I remember, you know, Halley's Comet coming over. That probably dates me, but, you know, and everything in there around, around that time is just incredibly fascinating. And, you know, built a telescope at a very early age and just, you know, just kept on fueling that passion. But the other passion I had was engineering. And when you combine space with engineering, you kind of naturally gravitate towards a launch vehicle at some point. So, you know, it was almost pre-coded that was a likely outcome. And, you know, started building rockets when I was at school and you know, built little engines and started off with hybrids, solids, hydrogen peroxide, liquids, and they got bigger and bigger and more complicated. And it really got to the point where I felt like I could do something with it. And ultimately I went to the US and went on a bit of a rocket pilgrimage. And that was a catalyst for coming home and starting Rocket Lab.
That's fantastic. And what an inspiring story that is. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about Rocket Lab itself. How's the company grown under your leadership and where do you see it going in the next few years or the next decade?
Yeah, so and I started the company in 2007, but we really started the Electron program, which is our small sat launcher, in 2013 or 2014-ish. So it was a relatively quick development program. You know, our first launch was in 2017, first commercial launch in 2018. And really, we originally started out by solving what we thought is the biggest problem, and that was access to space. So for small spacecraft especially. So we set to trying to build a small launch vehicle for doing dedicated small launch for the small satellite community. And you know, as it stands today, we've flown 13 times, 11 successful flights, you know, 11 in a row, and which I'm sure we'll get to. No doubt there'll be questions. And actually, at the end of last year, we were the fourth most frequently launched rocket in the world. So Falcon 9 was the third, and then Soyuz and China from there onwards. So a lot of people know us as a rocket company, but we do a lot more than just that. So we also have a satellite division, and the satellite division is growing really quickly. We made an acquisition earlier this year of a satellite component company to bring all that spacecraft componentry in house, and we manage spacecraft on orbit for governments, and of course probably a program that a number of viewers may be familiar with is the Capstone program, which is where we're delivering a spacecraft to the moon for NASA, and so that's kind of the most extreme version of our spacecraft division is actually doing you know, lunar and interplanetary work, but there's lots of little platforms and things in between. So, like I say, originally we started off solving with the the goal to solve launch as a problem. We feel like launch is largely a solved problem. One electron rolls off the production line at the moment every 24 days-ish. So it's largely just a scaling, a problem from here on. Build some more, reduce the cost, launch is solved. But the bit that's still not solved is the next kind of step is how do you enable people to get the innovation and ideas on orbit? And getting there is one element. Building the spacecraft is a whole nother. So that's where we introduce the Photon platform, so that it just drastically reduces any barriers for innovation, for businesses to get ideas on orbit.
Well, I'm sure we're going to talk more about all of these things as we progress over the next 55 minutes. But obviously, we've had a couple of questions out of what is a very impressive record of 11 successful launches. On Sunday, there was obviously an anomaly after launch. And we've had a lot of questions coming through, and I might add a lot of really good wishes, but a lot of questions coming through about what happened. I understand there's an investigation going on, and that's formal, and so you're unable to comment on the causes of the failure at this time. But what are you able to tell us?
Yeah, so what I can say is, I don't think there's a rocket in history that hasn't experienced a failure somewhere along its lifetime. So we're always prepared for this. Of course, we never want to have it, but built enough space hardware to know that some days your day comes around. But what I can say is that the failure was very graceful, and why that's important is it gives you the ability to capture wonderful data. So the rocket just didn't disappear. We saw the failure occur very gracefully, and then once the engine shut down, we were able to also continue receiving data from the vehicle. So we have 30,000 channels of data, all streamed, all lovely. So we know really clearly the sequence. The tricky thing as always is ruling in, getting down to root cause. And the tricky thing about root cause is making sure that both you prove what it is, but quite often you spend a lot more time proving what it isn't. So it's not good enough just to prove what it is. You have to go through every single system, turn over every stone, and prove that system did not have any kind of connection to the anomaly. So we're working very quickly. Like I say, it's kind of it sounds weird to say a dream anomaly, but really, as far as anomalies go, it was very good to us. So we'll be there back on the pad pretty quickly, and ready to go again, and a busy rest of this year.
That's great to hear. And I think there's, as I said, a lot of goodwill from the Australian space community, and no doubt the New Zealand space community, but also internationally for Rocket Lab and what you're doing. Now we've got a question.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful.
Oh, go on.
Well, just saying, it's just been incredible, to see the support, and we just have to thank everybody who gave that, because it is a tough time, but it really energizes the team to see such such support behind us, and so thank you for everybody who gave us kind words.
Now we've had a question from one of the people viewing this, which goes in a little bit of a different direction, and
Sure.
The question is, you're obviously a bit of an inspiration to many of us young people coming up in the space industry. What would you recommend current students do to get into the space industry?
Well, I mean, I'm a great believer in the best results are to follow your passion. So find the thing that you're really excited about. If it's analysis, if it's structures, whatever it is, and just pursue that with absolute vigor. That's when the best work is done, and that's when people are most productive and excited, and most fulfilling. Working on problems that they're really passionate about. So that's really the only advice I would give is choose a thing that you're passionate about and just run at it. Just run flat out at it.
I've heard that your parents were actually called into a meeting at your school once because your career advisor told them that your ambitions were absurdly unachievable, was the quote. Now, my question here is, I think it's great advice to pick something you're passionate about and run at it, but how do you keep going in the way that you have done when everyone around you tells you that your idea is impossible?
Well, I mean, you have to be selective of who you listen to. You know, there's lots of great advice, and there's some really rubbish advice. So, you know, if you really believe in something, then it shouldn't really matter. And what's the worst that can happen? You know, ultimately you can turn out to be wrong, but you know, I don't, you know, what's the matter with that? And I guess what I've learned over time is that people will say that's a really crazy idea, and then you'll go and execute it, and then they'll say, oh, that was just great vision. So you can't win either way. So you know, you may as well just follow the things that you think are important. I mean, one of the things about life that I've learned is that, and it's really frustrating. It's unfairly cruel how short a human lifespan is compared to the lifespan of everything else around you. If you look at, you know, geological timeframes, space timeframes, you know, just about every time frame there is, and it's measured in thousands of years or millions of years, the stupid human life is just so ridiculously short. It's just cruel. So if you've got this short period of time on the planet, then you really got to make it count.
Do you think that brevity of life and maybe a little bit of existential angst is what drives you in your career, or is there something else as well?
Oh, I mean, certainly I'm counting the clock. Every wasted minute is a wasted minute, and you know, you never know when your time's up. So that's certainly, you know, I wouldn't say it's a motivator, but it's certainly there. But you know, I think the bigger motivation is you know, space is one of the few domains, if not the only domain, where you can put something on orbit and it can have an impact to tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people on the planet. One little stupid box of electronics can have, you know, a huge impact to people's lives. I mean, just take GPS is the one that everybody can, you know, reconcile with the quickest. Is remove GPS and you know, apart from everybody getting lost, you've got the entire, you know, transport infrastructure is built on the back of it. There's no Uber Eats, there's no Uber, there's no Tinder. It all goes away. So you know, you know, space just has the ability to influence so many lives globally. It's really about maximum impact.
That's very inspiring. Look, the Q&A is determined that we get back to the tech. So we've got a question coming in from Henry. Henry says, really impressed with the work Rocket Lab has been doing in the last few years. When will you be doing mid-air recovery in actual flight missions?
Yeah, so the big recovery test is slated for Flight 17. So that vehicle's sitting on the shop floor right now, and you know, we've done 2 flights where we re-enter the stage and we got wonderful data, and we're able to re-enter that stage, and that was really the hardest thing. We did a test of a mid-air capture. It was great to tick that one off. Flight 17 is where we re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. We slow the stage down, and we're just going to splash it down gently into the ocean. And once we've got it into the ocean, we'll go and pick it back up, and then we'll really be able to see what we've got. The swoop with the helicopter is kind of, you know, the next step after that. But at least we've demonstrated that we can do it, and we understand the operational kind of limitations and aspects to that. But getting one back in the factory in whatever condition possible, however possible, is the most important thing.
Yeah, it sounds like such a crazy thing to be doing, and you know, a real technological achievement if you can make it happen. What problems do you anticipate having when you pick it up and take it back into the factory? What sort of things do you think you'll need to be looking at in terms of getting it ready to use again?
Yeah, I mean, we've instrumented the stages pretty well, so we've got a reasonable idea of the environment. But you know, the base heat shield, you know, that's there for the engines, was never designed for re-entry, and we're not even trying to make changes to that, because until we can really understand you know, the condition of that heat shield, you're flying blind. It's one of those things where you can instrument as well as you can, but the environment is just so unique that really, you know, you need to get one back. So it's really too early to say what modifications and what things we'll need to do. But you know, to date, the instrumentation will tell us that, that they're certainly going to need some thermal protection improvements in the bottom end. But you know, in the re-entry test, the tanks came in fully pressed, happy as, and we had telemetry right down to impact into the water. So it was a relatively happy first stage.
Awesome. Now we've got a question from Hamish, which is, how do you think the demand for Electron launches from small sat operators will change with the growth of rideshare and space tugs?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So, this question is often asked is how does rideshare and low-cost rideshare you know, compete with dedicated? And the reality is it's a totally different customer. So, and the easiest way to describe it is if you want to get somewhere and you don't mind riding with a whole lot of people, and just think of it as a bus. You stand at a bus stop, you'll stand at the bus stop for a long time, wait for the bus to turn up, the bus is on its schedule, you'll climb on the bus, you'll sit on a seat, you might sit beside someone who smells, you might not, and it'll be, you know, driven to a destination, not your house or where you want to go, but to a destination, and you're dropped off. And the bus ticket's cheap. And a dedicated, and that works fine, you know, that works absolutely fine. However, if you're trying to go out for dinner and you've got nice clothes on, that might not be the best way to get there. So you call an Uber, and the Uber comes to exactly where you are, it picks you up, and it drops you off to exactly where you want to be, and you pay more for it. So I know it sounds like an oversimplistic analogy, but it's actually incredibly accurate. So the kind of customers that will ride on a ride share aren't really the kind of customers who require dedicated service, specific orbits on specific time frames, and it's really a different, you know, quite a different thing. But both have their place in the market, and both are really important. You know, rideshare is a wonderful mechanism for, you know, early stage companies to get a few CubeSats up. It just doesn't matter where the orbit is, or it doesn't matter, you know, what LTAN it is. Just get it up. But when you're trying to build a business and a constellation, and you're trying to, you know, especially if you're trying to build a constellation of 10 spacecraft, and you need different LTANs, sometimes different planes, you know, there's just not rideshare to those planes or to those LTANs. So that's when you require a dedicated vehicle. And the other part of it is, you know, we have the kind of the Uber customer, and then we have the rideshare customer with their hair on fire, where you know, they've got their spacecraft, they've booked on a rideshare, the rideshare pushes out and pushes out and pushes out, and sometimes they get kicked off and all those things. And the time that you can often spend sitting on the shelf, especially if you're a commercial startup company, the time that you spend on the shelf is time that you can't generate revenue. So if you're sitting there for 6 months waiting for your rocket, and you've burned through 6 months of costs, and, you know, foregone 6 months of revenue, you add that up, it's way cheaper to just grab a dedicated ride and just get there than wait for the bus. So those are really, you know, the majority of the kinds of customers we have, and the difference between the two.
That's really interesting.
Space tugs are interesting, but the thing there is that you know, there's kind of chemical propulsion space tugs, and then EP, or electric propulsion space tugs. The trouble with electric propulsion space tugs, it takes them forever to get anywhere. So you're back to the same problem where you know, you're 3 or 4 months you know, burning a plasma to try and do a 2 or 3 degree plane change, or raise your orbit to shift your LTAN and things like that. Chemical is a little bit quicker, but still, by the time you factor in the cost of the tug, the cost of the on-orbit mission services, and the time frame, and then couple that with a ride share, for some missions it absolutely works. For some missions it doesn't. And, you know, we've run some missions with Electron, because we have the kick stage, upper stage, where we've gone way high to, you know, 500 kilometers or something, dropped off a spacecraft, then we've burned, we've come back down, dropped off another spacecraft, and then we've done deorbit burns and disposal burns. We did one where we went to 500 Ks, dropped off a large spacecraft, then shrank back down, recircularized to 450 Ks, and you know, put off a bunch of really small spacecraft that had to be below the International Space Station limit. So, you know, the kick stage in the Electron really is a tug already, like, so you can do those kind of plane changes, but it's very niche, very niche.
That's super interesting, the way that the space economy is growing, but also differentiating in that way. So you've got various different classes of clients with different needs and expectations. And I guess we shouldn't be surprised to see that. It's happened in every other area of the economy as it's developed. We have buses and trains, but we still have cars, you know? Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Now, we've got a question from Ruben coming through, and I think Ruben, like many people, might be thinking about a job in future. How dare we think about jobs, which is, what do you look for in your potential employees, or what achievements or traits make an individual stand out from the crowd within the space community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we are hiring. We have a lot of, so I'm just going to take this opportunity unashamedly to just plug that we are hiring. We need a lot of people. But seriously, you know, there's kind of two things that we look for in people at Rocket Lab. Firstly is brilliance. So unashamedly, the bar is high. And everybody here working at Rocket Lab is the best at what they do. And we don't make any apologies for that. The second thing we look for is cultural fit. Someone who is motivated, self-driven, passionate. You know, we will hire somebody who with a lesser academic qualification, but more drive and passion every day of the week. So it's not good enough. If you wanted to come and work for Rocket Lab, it's not good enough just to be the best. You have to be the best and you know, motivated and passionate. And we see just like hundreds of CVs every week. And if your CV looks like everybody else's, it's impossible. It's just, I don't know who teaches how to write a CV, but they all need to be fired, because they all look the same. It's the same format, and I can't tell if you're passionate. I can't tell if you're incredible. So, you know, what we look for is, what do you do outside your education? Your education is a given, and you know, I don't place a huge value on whether you're straight A's or B's. Not so cared about that. I'd much rather see what you've done in the weekend and what you do at nights. If you sit on the couch at nights and play video games, you're not working for us. But if you know, at night, if you build stuff, if you're passionate, if you've got interests, and you put all your energy into those things, now we're talking. That's much more interesting for us.
We've got a follow-up question from Megan, which is, are you running a summer internship program in New Zealand this year?
I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we do. We are this year, yeah. Yep.
All right, there you go.
The bar is high, but yes.
Look, the bar is high, but anyone on this particular call watching this is already miles ahead, I'd say.
I expect so. So.
If I were you, I'd put that in the cover letter. Look, I've got a follow-up question, and this is my own question, but to what extent do you think your own educational background has shaped the attitude you take to CVs and to the balance you give to marks versus other factors?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that probably definitely colours it. But I don't think it's unique to me. I think you know, all of the managers and hiring staff, you know, it's just hard-baked culture here. Yeah, I'm not really sure if it's kind of specific to, you know, to my background, but you know, if you come here and you meet the people, you know, they are relentless executors. These people in their lives are just the most phenomenal human beings. And you know, a company, people get confused. A company is not me. A company is not a logo, or even a pretty looking rocket. A company is the people that did all that. And you know, you can brand a company however you want and market a company however you want, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the product speaks for itself, and that is the product as a result of the people.
This has really struck a chord with people watching this, and we've got a question from Luca saying, what do you feel is more important to a career in aerospace, doing a postgrad degree or more work experience?
Oh, I don't want to upset parents here. My view is work experience. You know, postdoc is great as well, but and it really depends on what you want to do. But you know, but it's really where you want to go, and how quickly you want to enter the, you know, the workforce. If you just want to be done with school and get into the workforce, then I would say work experience. But work experience goes a long way. Certainly when I'm looking at a CV, I absolutely look at that and see where they've worked. if you're an engineer, then chances are in your downtime, you most likely have worked for an engineering company. That's what we look for is, you know, where have you placed for internships? If you've gone to dad's carpet factory, then you're probably not really hungry. If you've gone out and you've found new opportunities that interest you, and you've been successful in getting them, and you put yourself out there, that's really inspiring for us to see.
This might be a great moment for me to do my job and plug the Australian Youth Aerospace Association. Subscribe to the channels, and the people in the team there put up all sorts of opportunities for internships and those sorts of experiences, as well as providing an opportunity for you to meet the sorts of people who will give you those internships and provide those sorts of experiences. So that's all. I've done my job now. I can relax.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be internships in companies that are adjacent, that are specific. They can be very adjacent. You know, working in a foundry, it may not sound like it's very aerospace-y, but you know, someone who has worked in a foundry and put themselves in you know, in an interesting position and gone out there, that is, you know, that, like I say, that's super interesting and inspiring. So don't think you have to go and work for BAE or Boeing or Lockheed. No, just really good engineering experience, or physics, or you know, whatever sector you're going after.
All right, thank you for that. Now, quick back to the tech question. What can you tell us about the Photon program?
Yeah, so Photon is well, if you take it back to physics, you know, electrons emit photons in a higher order, and photons are smaller than electrons. So that's how it got its name. But basically the Photon is a satellite platform that shares some commonality with the rocket. If you look at the kick stage that's on the top of the launch vehicle, that is basically a satellite. It really only required us to put solar panels on it and some torque rods and reaction wheels and star trackers, and that is a spacecraft platform. So really the whole point of that platform is to enable people to, you know, to build commerce, to build capability in space. It always frustrated me that, you know, teams would go out, raise a whole lot of money, or if it was a government, you know, commission a whole lot of money to build a bespoke satellite. The spacecraft teams are like 3 times bigger than the sensor teams, but don't forget the sensor teams are the bit that creates the wealth, or the revenue, I should say, or the capability if you're talking about a government. So that's where you should be focusing the effort. Everything else, launch, spacecraft, bus, should be a commodity. That's not where people should have to worry about. If you're going to go to space, you shouldn't need to worry whether or not my reaction wheels are going to saturate. You just shouldn't need to worry about that. All you should worry about is my sensor going to deliver me the data that I need to generate revenue or to create the capability I want? And that's really what Photon is all about. But it covers quite a wide spectrum, from a very basic hosted payload in LEO, super simple, through to, you know, the thing over my shoulder, which is Photon Lunar, which, you know, can deliver spacecraft all the way into lunar orbit. So it's quite a spectrum of capability.
Yeah, and what's the plan with that lunar orbit capability?
Yeah, so we're commissioned to deliver a capstone spacecraft to a lunar orbit, and it will service as a communications relay test to enable the first man and woman to land back on the moon safely. So it's kind of the first piece of infrastructure for Artemis. So it's a really significant mission, and a really tricky one. Going to the moon is no joke. That is, and that's really difficult. Yeah.
We've got another tech question here from Ben, which is, what percentage of electron manufacturing is currently automated? And are you looking at increasing the level of automation in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that it sort of depends. Some areas are highly automated. So we put in Rosie the robot at the end of last year, and that is incredible automation. You know, it took a whole vehicle, days and days of work, and we can process a whole launch vehicle with, you know, stage 1 tank, stage 2 tank, fairings, interstage, kick stage in 12 hours. So, you know, that's every hole drilled, every every rivet, every sanding, every marking, everything on all the composite parts. So that's an example of, you know, wonderful automation. But some processes, you know, the payback might be 100 years to automate, so you're just not gonna do it. So some things are highly automated. I would say our engine manufacturing is by nature very highly automated because it's 3D printed. So, you know, every 12 hours or so, a new engine is kind of born. And like I said before, there's one rocket rolls off the production line every 24 days, and that's got 10 engines. So every 24 days, there's 10 engines that are required. So, you know, the engine plant up in Long Beach in California is just chugging engines out at you know, at a great rate. So that was one of the reasons why we 3D printed the engine, is because the process lent itself to very complex shapes in a highly repeatable and manufacturable way. So some areas are automated than others. Engine test is super cool. So what the team did there, because it's electric turbo pump, basically the team take an engine out of the factory in the US, bolt it up to the engine test cell, and run a couple of blips with the electric pumps and check a few things out. Then they run it for like 20 seconds, just straight in and hot fire, just run it for 20 seconds. And in that 20 seconds, they throttle up and they throttle down, and they sort of move mixture ratios and muck around a little bit. And in that 20 seconds, they build all of the pump maps for the engine, all of the kind of injector CDAs, everything, and then go straight into a full duration hot fire, and that engine's basically ready to be integrated into the launch vehicle. So that whole process of tuning the engine is all done in software, it's all automated, and within that first 20 seconds, after that 20 seconds of hot fire, that engine's configured and ready for flight. It's just awesome. The team's just done, you know, incredible job. So there's bits like that they're pretty heavily automated.
That sounds incredibly cool. We have a question from Tom, just following up on that 3D printing of engines, which is, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced as part of doing that?
Yeah, so we started 3D printing engines when everyone thought it was weird. I remember when we unveiled the Rutherford at the National Space Symposium, and everybody's sort of 3D printing engines, that'll never work. And now, like, everybody has 3D printed engines. So, you know, the technology and the art has come a long way. But with any manufacturing processes, there's pluses and minuses. And the most important thing with additive manufacturing is designing your part for the process. Where a lot of people go wrong with additive manufacturing is they take a normal, you know, normally what would be a subtractively manufactured part, and then just go and print it, and they wonder why it doesn't work and costs heaps of money and takes heaps of time, and this whole 3D printing is a waste of time. Really, you have to you do the opposite as you do for a subtractively manufactured part, where a 3D printed part, you want to put the most amount of complexity, the most amount of part count in there as you possibly can, and get maximum bang for your buck. So if you design the part right to start, that's a big win. Secondly, you know, it's a rocket engine, so it's running at incredible pressures and temperatures and strains, and you know, it's not like a quasi-static part that's relatively easy at load, you know, understood load cases and benign environments. It's just the worst thing you could think of. So we did just tremendous amount of material science into the materials, and then, you know, all the parameters, there's like 150 parameters to change on a 3D printer, and any one of those can have quite a large effect. So material ductility is always a problem with 3D printed, and when you've got something that's you know, running at 800 degrees, 1,000 degrees, ductility becomes a problem, and you know, there's just like there's a bunch of stuff that's a problem. But the good thing is, though, the wonderful thing is that once you have the process dialed, it's so repeatable. You know, engine after engine after engine, it's so repeatable.
Yeah, that does sound like a really good way of automating a system, and it's really interesting that you've pioneered that at Rocket Lab. Now, I want to talk about Southern Hemisphere stuff. Yep. What do you think that Australia and New Zealand can offer to the space industry and economy, not just now, but as we look forward, say, for the next 20, 30 years?
Yeah, so this is actually really exciting, I think, because space is geographically agnostic now, meaning it does not matter where you reside. It really doesn't, especially in the spacecraft area. Launch is a little bit different because you've got to have certain things for a launch to work, like a geographical location that enables the trajectories and all the flight safety corridors and all that kind of stuff. So that's probably that's probably, you know, less so geographically agnostic, but everything else basically is, especially spacecraft. It just does not matter where you build a spacecraft. And all you need to build a great spacecraft is a group of really smart, passionate people with a mission. That's it. So you know, I'm really excited to see some of the programs in Australia, especially, and some of the spacecraft developments there, some of the commercial companies, some of the startups. So I think you know, I think there's a really bright future for Australia to create not just a satellite industry, but a national capability. You know, Australia's a massive land mass, suits very well for you know, the macro scale of space. So I think you know, I think Australia's direction in small spacecraft is absolutely, you know, bang on.
Yeah, that's really interesting perspective that you have. And we have a question from Barry, which I think goes to your leadership style and your vision as a CEO and a founder, which is, how did you make Rocket Lab the most innovative company in the Southern Hemisphere? Look, that's a big call from
kind.
Barry. But,
yeah,
but
geez, thanks,
I
Barry.
wouldn't
That's pretty
contradict
kind.
it.
Well, at the end of the day, I guess it's about the mission, and the mission statement here is, we go to space to improve life on Earth. And as you walk in the door, that's the first thing you read, whether you're an employee or you know, a visitor, and that really drives everything. And you know, once you kind of understand the impact that you can have from space, it becomes very important. And when something becomes very important, then you'll do anything to get it done. And so, you know, really, I would say the company, the products that we build are a result of just sheer determination to solve a problem. And we're just engineers, so we just engineer our way into the best solution. And you know, the innovations that we, you know, that we've kind of born, the 3D printing, the carbon composite tanks, the electric turbo pump cycle, all those things, they're not born because we're sitting around a coffee table thinking it would be cool. They're born out of absolute necessity. You know, we needed a composite tank to be able to hit all the mass margins and have something we could reproduce really rapidly. You know, just not having to paint it. You know, there's no such thing as just normal paint on a rocket. Any paint on a rocket has to be, you know, triboelectrification paint, where you know, it has to be able to carry a charge. Otherwise, you shoot lightning bolts to the ground. So even just painting a rocket is a giant pain. So the solution to that is, don't paint a rocket, build it out of carbon. So everything is very practical in a lot of sense, that we have a core mission, and everything is about executing to that core mission with the best engineering solution. And if it's new and it doesn't exist, that's fine, because the prize is too big to not try.
When you say we go to space to improve life on Earth, I want to dig into that a little bit. What do you mean by that? What's the underlying philosophy there?
Yeah, so I think space, I look at space as infrastructure, nothing more complicated than infrastructure. And just like pipes in the ground, you know, you go to your sink, you turn on the tap, water comes out. And, you know, how often do you think about all the infrastructure that's behind that water, right through all of the piping networks to the, you know, to the reservoirs and pumping stations? It's amazing, but you never think about, you know, all of that. And space is the same, because it's all hidden infrastructure. You walk outside, you pick up your phone, and you know, you just expect GPS to be there, and it's just, you know, a network of spacecraft providing all that service, and it's all hidden. And the thing is that space is impossible to be country centric. Like it is once you're really out in space, now you're talking about a global kind of centric environment. So I think once you do that, that's when you have the ability to not just influence and you know, have impact in your own country, but other people's countries, in fact, the whole planet. And it takes such a small thing to have such a massive impact. GPS is a RF signal, nothing more than a timestamp from space. look what it does. So, you know, space is one of those few domains where, you know, such small things can pull big levers. And, you know, ultimately, as I was saying before, you've got this unreasonably short time on the planet, and you may as well, not may as well, you must make the most amount of impact for the species as you can. And that, for me, is space.
I think we've all been reminded of our global existence over the last few months with this pandemic.
Yep.
How has Rocket Lab been affected by COVID-19?
Yeah, I think like everybody, you know, we shut down our factory here in New Zealand for 5 weeks or more. The US factory was able to continue with some pretty extreme social distance measures, a lot of teleworking, and was able to continue through, and they still continue today. In New Zealand, as you know, it was just, it was just a complete hard shutdown. So, you know, everybody worked from home, and you know, I'm just so incredibly proud of the team because they got so much done over the break. Everybody just grabbed all their gear. I think some sneaky gas bottles and some experiments went into people's garage just so that the tests could carry on. I know that one of our team took half the looming division home and set up a looming shop at her house and just kept on building looms. So, you know, a pandemic's not going to slow us down. It's got to be bigger than that. But it was certainly disruptive. And it continues to be very disruptive. You know, New Zealand's borders are closed. It's very hard to bring customers and experts in to the borders, and for us to leave and come back. Like it's seriously, you know, constraining. But for the wider space industry, it's kind of interesting because there was a lot of investments made in you know, from Silicon Valley and the wider venture capital communities, which were very speculative. And there's a number of things that, you know, we all sort of stood there scratching our head going, that seems like 100-year vision rather than something you're going to cash out in 20 years. So there was a lot of really weird stuff done, which, by the way, is fantastic. That's truly awesome because even though it might not make it to commercialization, it pushes the state of the art. And you know, if investors, I don't see that as lost money. I see that as you know, contribution to humanity. Even if you learn one thing and publish one paper, then that's great. It's good value. But nevertheless, there's a lot of businesses in the space sector that, depending on where you were in your raise, whether you're just about to raise or just have raised, were put in pretty difficult positions because venture capital is shut down. You know, it's going to take a while for the VCs to come back. So it is a challenging time for kind of the new space industry. But look, it's a road bump, and you know, there'll be some teams that you know, kind of fall, but they'll be consolidated or reformed, and it's disappointing, of course. But you know, at the end of the day, you know, I tend to try to look at it. It's not terminal. It's a road bump, and you know, we'll get out the other side and continue to grow, and the industry will be just fine.
Let's talk finance and return on investment. We've got a question here from Nick, which is, how do the lifetimes of the engines relate to the lifetime of the rest of the Electron rocket? How does the cost of refurbishment compare to the initial sunk cost of the system? So I guess that goes right to the finance question.
Yep. Yeah. I thought it was going to be a much harder finance question than that.
Well, we can ask them, send them through.
Sure. No. Well, the answer to that is I don't know, because we haven't got one back yet, and that's the whole reason for pushing so hard to get one back in the factory. On one set of the spectrum, you have a vehicle that's perfect, that you just charge the batteries back up again, fuel it up, and fly. I mean, that's utopia. Now, I'm not naive to think that that's going to happen. And then the other end of the spectrum is just a charred carbon tube. And you know, we know roughly where we're sitting in that spectrum from the instrumentation, the flights we've done. But really, it'll depend on you know, the mitigation, in fact, how well we're able to mitigate the potential loads and damages through re-entry. But you know, if recovering stage one is less about economics, it's more about production. So if we can bring a stage one back and spend half the amount of time refurbishing it that it takes to build a new one, you know, we've just added 50% more production capacity to the factory without having to build any more production lines or do anything major. And, you know, if refurbishment is relatively simple, you can basically double your production by recovering a stage. And that's by far much more important to us now, is to, you know, to be able to, the ability to fly out our manifest quickly and support our customers quickly than kind of finesse some microeconomics about, is it slightly cheaper to reuse an engine or not?
Right, so looking at a high volume of launch capability rather than looking at your margins on each launch then.
Yeah, just try and get our customers on orbit. That's the key, and just try and get more vehicles out there. The more vehicles we can get out there, then the more customers can get on orbit, and ultimately the lower cost we can drive to, for sure.
Sure. We've got a question also on this finance side coming through from Tom. And I'm going to say up front, I'm aware you might not be able to answer this question, but do you foresee Rocket Lab going for IPO? Yeah,
I mean, it's an interesting thought. So you have to examine what's the rationale for IPOing, and if you know, a good reason to IPO is access to capital. Well, we've been pretty successful in raising private capital. We've never been short of private capital to execute what we want to do. So, you know, there's a lot of drag that comes with going public, for sure. But if you can remain private and fund the things you want to do privately, that's great. But there does come a point where you know, ambitions might outstrip the available private capital, and at that point, that's a good reason to go public. Another good reason to go public is investors want a liquidity event. And that goes to, it's a really important point here, which I see so many entrepreneurs fail at, and that's really choosing the right investor for your business. The first piece of advice I give any entrepreneur is, you know, the least valuable thing an investor ever gives you is their cash. So it's really, really important to, you know, to pick your investors in the team. You know, look, if you create an engineering team and they're a bunch of bad engineers, you end up with a bad product. If you create a board full of unaligned board members that haven't got your interest at heart, then you're going to have a bad company. So,
yeah, and I suppose, you know, it's a challenge for the relatively nascent new space industry to be going down the public line, because it's hard to know how to value a company like Rocket Lab. It's hard to know whether you're talking about tech or whether you're talking about logistics or whether you're talking about transport or whether it's something entirely different. So I can imagine in the current climate, that's tricky.
Yeah, no, and it is entirely different. But I mean, it has been a curious experiment. I'm sure probably some people here have followed Virgin Galactic, and you know, that's you know, that's a really interesting stock, because you know, the product's not quite developed yet, the market's not developed yet, but yet that stock's been really successful. So yeah, the question, you know, certainly the question has to be posed: well, what happens if you bring a company that has a product, has a market, a proven market, and it's a true space play? It would be interesting to see, you know, how the public markets would respond, for sure.
It would be absolutely fascinating, because Virgin Galactic in some ways was a little bit like an airline more than anything else, or it's sort of like exposure to a future thing potentially. Whereas, yeah, a company like Rocket Lab, it's already doing that sort of thing. Now we've got a question coming through, which is, what is your favorite thing about a rocket launch?
Successful orbit. The moment we put our customer satellites on orbit, we give them the state vectors and they're all healthy. That's my favorite part. I do not enjoy rocket launches. No, I do not enjoy rocket launches.
Really?
No. One day I will. But look, there's just so much effort that goes into it. The teams poured their heart and soul into the launch vehicle. The customers have done the same on the spacecraft. Lots of money is exchanged hands, and you know, I'm probably on a spectrum for this, but I like to do a good job, and so if you don't do a good job, that's not good. So I just the best part is when it's finished, for sure.
Fair enough. We've got a follow-up question to that from Simon, which is, what's been the most inspiring payload that you have launched to date?
Oh, there's so many. So I would have liked to have said my one, the Humanity Star, but that wasn't as inspirational as I'd hoped. It did inspire a whole lot of people, but it also annoyed a whole lot of people as well. So in hindsight, that was going to be, at least the most inspirational thing that I was hoping to achieve with that. But one of them, we get to fly such cool stuff, but one of them that sticks in my mind was one of our NASA missions. And, the customer was integrating the payload into the spacecraft as I was standing beside them. And as they were integrating it in, we're just sort of yarning. And that was a $20 million payload, 20 years of work and life to get that payload on orbit. And it was just such a cool machine.
Yeah, totally. Well, the Humanity Star was kind of oddly divisive at the time. And I think I had some conversations with various scientists and engineers about it. And I wondered whether maybe it was because we like to think of space as a place for science and technology. And the idea of putting something that's entire purpose is to be artistic in some way, kind of, it really, I think it made a lot of people stop and think, and it challenged their views a bit. What do you think? Why do you think it was so controversial, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I stand back now and I look at it as a net positive, because I think that's an important discussion that needed to happen. We needed to bring up. I would rather someone else brought it up than me, but I think it was an important point. But the flip side to that is, yes, it's like the noisy few create a lot of signal to noise ratio. But I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of letters and emails we got, and just, all I wanted is parents to take their children, or just everybody, go outside, look up and look for that flashing star. And in doing so, the object of the exercise was, for people to understand that they're living on a rock in the solar system, in the universe. And, the rock is highly dynamic, and you're largely insignificant on the rock. I know that's kind of a little bit depressing, but the point of it is that, all your terrestrial day's problems are kind of irrelevant in the scheme of humanity. So, and we're all the same. We're all one species, no matter what. So a lot of people really got the message, and for a lot of people, it really changed the way that they viewed their lives. And we made some astronomers. A bunch of kids wrote in and said, "I want to be an astronomer now." So I view it as a net positive, but it was certainly challenging. So controversial at the time, for sure.
Yeah, I think it was one of those launches that really got people talking, and the same was with the Musk's launch of the Tesla. But I think as we look back historically, the Humanity Star, as you say, will be a net positive and something that people will look on as a good thing and an interesting thing, and really a beautiful thing as well.
Yeah, I don't see how Elon can put a Tesla in orbit on a billion-year lifespan, and I cop more crap than he does for something that lasted 3 months. But we'll just have to live with that one, I guess.
Well, maybe we can line him up for an AYAA interview. Your assistance would be greatly appreciated in lining that up.
Sure.
Look, I think we need to finish up shortly. So the final question would be, if people watching this are going to go away and do anything, read anything, think about anything, maybe go and Google nihilist philosophy, what would you want them to go away and think about or do after this?
Well, I mean, most of the people here are probably, passionate about space. So normally I would say go outside and look up. I think not enough people go outside and just look up and think. Like, just sit there for half an hour and just think. And I think that's a really refreshing mind experiment. But given that most people already here probably already do that, I would just say, think about the thing that you want to do with your life, and the bigger the better, because it's all energy that you spend that you can't get back. So go and do something big with your life.
Peter, this has been just so inspiring and so interesting. Thank you so much for making time for this. And thank you also to your team over at Rocket Lab for making it happen. I know I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope all of the people we're broadcasting to have enjoyed it as well. Now, a little bit of admin from me, and it's very quick. Please subscribe to the AYAA channel for upcoming events. We should have a video coming soon from the Australian Space Agency, so you do not want to miss that. And also, please stay tuned to Aerospace Futures Online and to what Rocket Lab is up to as we navigate your changing skies. Peter, thank you very much. I hope you have a lovely evening.
Thanks very much, Annie. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Cheers.